Uh, inshallah, the assault course of this course, I hope, is going to get easier for you. I think we've covered a big part of the hump of the camel. We've gone right to the top. Is how did Europe get here to all these ideas, the Enlightenment ideas? So now we're going to talk about the ikhtilaf that happened after they developed these ideas. And inshallah, hopefully it'll make sense to you. So after liberalism was developed, there was another school of thought that had ikhtilaf. It said, okay, liberalism, okay, freedom is good. Oh, yes, sorry. We shouldn't have a dictator. All right, that makes sense. We should have people to do what they want as long as they don't physically harm each other. Okay, kind of. But there's one key issue these people would challenge, and they would say, why did we get to liberalism in the first place? How did we get there? And is it because we were just lucky? Or is it because the culture of Europe or the West is a certain way that it creates liberalism? It allows you to have these freedom and liberalism and so on. And if so, if the culture of the West that got you there, then should we not conserve some of that culture and not change it? I think I'm giving away the next school of thought that's on the menu today. But first, let's just talk about where they come from. So there was a rise of a group of people called the Tories. You might have heard it mentioned in English politics, the Tories. It refers to the right wing. And initially, the Tories were people who were pro-monarchy. They wanted the monarchy not to lose all its powers, even if the monarch was Catholic or was pro-Catholic or didn't want to persecute Catholics. They said, don't depose the monarchy. The monarchy should stay in his position. It creates instability to get rid of the monarchy. We should be, the monarch is not a tyrant, so don't get rid of him just because he doesn't want to be anti-Catholic. So but the English still got rid of King James II, and they brought in this Dutch guy called William III of Orange, and it was called the Glorious Revolution. There was no blood spilled. It's more like a coup, I suppose. And the year after, they established the Bill of Rights in English Parliament. We talked about this, the Bill of Rights. And there was a counter to this. There was a group of people who wanted to rebel against this and bring James back into power because he was the rightful king, and you can't depose the king just because he doesn't follow the laws you want to implement. And these people were called the Tories. Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah. I forgot. Sorry. Where is the... Okay. So these people are called the Tories, and they were opposed by people who believed in progress and development, more that you should make changes, gradual changes, but changes. They were called the Whigs, right? So the Whig Party and the Tory Party. The origin of the name Tory is actually derived from an Irish word called toread. And the Irish word means pursuit, or it means, it was a nickname referring to outlaws. It was saying people who are pro-Catholics are criminals. People who support the Catholics are criminals. It was referred to some Irish people who were Catholics. Irish people tend to be more Catholics. And so it was a nickname that was given to them, but it was used to refer to people who were pro-monarchy and wanted to bring a suspected pro-Catholic king back into power. So they were called bandits, funnily enough. That's where the word Tory comes from. even though it's quite funny because now Tory refers to the opposite of bandits, or people who are Tories tend to be anti-crime and tend to be, tough on criminals and also immigration and things like this, the Tories. Now, this is the origin of the name. So if you supported something in the past, past tradition, past ideas, you were called a Tory. And if you were supporting change, progress, some development, you were called a Whig. Eventually, these two terms would transform into the right wing and left wing, but I want to get to that first. So after John Locke, after all these ideas that we've covered, there was a philosopher, Scottish philosopher called David Hume, influential, academic. It was influential with British politics. He didn't really change many laws per se, but what he actually did is he argued something that was against what the liberals were arguing. See, the liberals said that knowledge improves people, right? If you have knowledge, it improves people. They become more civilized. So you should have freedom of speech. You should have all this stuff. And David Hume said, actually, humans, yes, they have an intellect, but what does the intellect serve? Because it serves your nafs, right? It serves your shahawat. It serves your desires. So humans are actually irrational. They only use their intellect to work out how to get what they want, but what they want might not be correct or rational or reasonable. So, and he even said, reason ought to be the slave of the passions. This is what he actually said. He said, there's nothing wrong with this. He said, this is natural. You can't trust reason or the aql because aql serves the nafs, right? It serves the qalb, right? It serves the heart, not the other way around. This was his claim, anyway. So because of this, he argues that you don't trust that you're going to be so wise, or that liberalism, all these things are so wise that you can basically, that it will always improve humans. Humans can't be improved, right? There can be good circumstances and bad circumstances, but humans are always the corrupting element, right? They break things, they destroy things, they corrupt things. So don't be optimistic. Because remember, John Locke, and I mentioned Thomas Hobbes, they said that humans are, no, not Thomas Hobbes, sorry, Thomas Hobbes was negative. John Locke said, oh, humans are naturally good. They want to do good, they want to help, and so on. They just need the right opportunity, the right freedom, right? And knowledge. David Hume says, nope, humans are selfish, and if it suits them, they'll be corrupt. If it doesn't, they'll be nice. But you can't trust humans. That's the important doctrine. I think one brother told me before in the break, he said, how am I going to remember all these names? I want to help you with this. You don't have to remember the names, any of these names, Locke, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, whoever. Just remember the thinking processes, how they changed, the ideas. That's the most important. Because most people today who believe in these ideas don't even know these guys, or okay, they might have heard of John Locke, maybe in America as well, but they haven't read their books. They don't know what they say. They have these ideas passed down to them by their society. So don't worry. You don't need to learn the names. Just know the ideas. So this guy is arguing that you can't trust humans. They're not naturally good. They're selfish and they can be corruptible. David Hume said that if people having freedom, if it clashes with government, if it clashes with the idea of having an authority, then you should limit freedoms and preserve government, preserve authority, right? Government is more important than freedom, but only if it clashes, only if there's a clash. Now, that's all you need to know. Basically, you see underneath the name, I write down the summary, the preface for those are if you don't look at anything else in my lectures, just read the subtitle, behind the name, underneath the name. That's all, just that basic idea. And the text underneath that just proves that I was not making it up. That's what they say, and that's what they believe. Okay, this is David Hume. Now, Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a French guy, but it's from Geneva, modern day Geneva, but he's a French speaker. You don't need to remember his name. David Hume, remember, is from England or UK rather. And Jacques Rousseau is from France, he's from the continent. He does not have the same ideas as David Hume, but I need to mention him. He starts a different madhab, but I have to mention because he has an influence. This madhab will lead to an influence of creating a madhab in England to counter. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued a little bit different. He said man is naturally good, like John Locke said, but it's not ignorance that makes him evil, it's society that makes him evil. Right? So he argues that society corrupts human beings, it makes them evil. Because he'd say, if he was here today, he'd say the peoples that commit hijackings and stealings and what have you, they were born innocent children. They were nice. They smiled at people when they grew up, but they had no food, or they deprived of opportunities. They had no employment, no prospects. So society deprived them, and that's what made them commit crime. The will of the majority in a government is more important than the individual, because the individual is part of the bigger general will. These are just ideas you need to remember, because what will happen is the French Revolution. So the French Revolution goes along the ideas of Jacques Rousseau and others. And let me give you some context. Get some blood into my legs. Okay, so in France, it was a monarchy, a rich Catholic church. So it got to a point where there was mass poverty in France, right? Mass poverty. And the nobles, the king, and the rich church clergy, they obviously did not suffer any poverty. They didn't suffer starvation or any of these problems. So it got to a point but they owned land. They didn't even use. The French royalty were famous for having massive feasts with all different kinds of recipes. In fact, that's why French cuisine is so varied. French food is so varied, because they used to invent stuff to give to the king, but the king wanted variety, right? And so they'd have massive banquets. It was famous, and they'd invite all the nobles, and it was very much like you see in, you imagine all these rich aristocratic people, gobbling up food and enjoying the fine wines, and people starving on the streets. It was that kind of typical scene. So in that society, of course, especially Jacques Rousseau and others who argued that, look, the people are deprived of food, deprived of their rights. They first tried to, the king tried to compromise, and they allowed a national assembly to be where people could be elected and discuss the problems. And on the National Assembly, there were people who were sitting on the right of the assembly who said, look, we have, the king, we have to respect the king, we have to respect the traditions of his country. Sure, we might maybe some reforms for the poor, but the king, we have to respect his office. We can't insult him or attack him or what have you. And there were those at the far right who said, no, we don't need to have these kind of parliaments and things like this. The king should have absolute power, because if we give the king absolute power, he'll be a good king, right? He only gets angry or upset because people challenging him. If you don't challenge him, he'll be nice. And then on the left side of the National Assembly were people who were calling for, well, why do we kind of need a king anyway? We should have more power for the people's parliament, basically, the people's National Assembly. We should decide our own laws, our affairs. Maybe we keep the king as a figurehead, but we should have like England, something more like England. And then those who are sitting on the far left of that assembly, who said, no, forget kings. Kings they don't have the right. We are all equal. Why should we have a king? We should kick out the king. And what about those nobles and so on? They have all the property. That property should be given to the people. How dare they have more than they need, much more than they need, right? the reason why I mentioned where they were sitting is because this is where we got the idea of right wing and left wing from. It comes from the French Parliament that was set up to try to resolve matters. It didn't work, of course. And so the more right you are, the more you want to keep things the same. And if you're really extreme white, you might want to go a little bit back in past, right? And the more left you go, the more rapid you want to make a change, the bigger the change you want to make. That's generally that's where we got idea of right wing and left wing from. So I hope that makes sense. So eventually, of course, the king actually didn't like all this, the parliament deciding, how dare you're going to tell me what to do now. I was only allowing this parliament for, in some way, to maybe rectify these problems, these complaints, but you're saying, I'm hearing things like you want to kick me out or limit my power. So the king resists, and part of the army defects to the parliament, or you might call it, they're not called the parliament, they're called National Assembly, but I'm just making it easy for you to understand. It's a parliament, you could say, and they storm the Bastille, which is an armory and part prison, and they storm it, and they basically take the weapons, and they basically, they storm the palaces, and they capture the king. This was a proper revolution, as you'd imagine. The people with the army, with part of the army, storm the king. The people never really storm the palace by themselves. That can only happen when the army is with you, or a part of the army is with you. The people, if you don't have the army with you, the army will kill you, basically. So king gets kicked out and then beheaded. The French Revolution started, and they want to change things. So they say all aristocrats are enemies of the people because they made us suffer, and while we starved, the king and the church is an enemy of the people too. So execute the priests. And they had to cut people's heads off. They were cutting people's heads off. And, like cutting people's heads off is difficult because you have to be trained, you have to have access. You're not always guaranteed to get it the first time. And it causes unnecessary, suffering. You have to cut a few times. So to make it more efficient, they invented a machine to make it much more efficient, where you get the one cut first time, called the guillotine, basically. And did you know the French were using that as a method of execution till 1972 or 71, right? No, it was 73, I think. That was it. Anyway, they were using it mostly on Algerians who were fighting for independence, but that's a different discussion. So they cut more. They cut so many heads. They made ISIS look like a children's charity. All right. Anyway, so that's the French Revolution. It was a radical one. People called themselves citizens. There would be no rank. Everyone was just a citizen. So they'd greet you as, a citizen Lafayette, citizen Robespierre, whatever. They would say like this. They wouldn't have any rankings. Everyone was equal. Although in practice, Robespierre was like higher than everybody else, right? And Napoleon Bonaparte makes his debut as a military officer, a low-ranking military officer, artillery officer in this point during the French Revolution. And he rises to power because he's very good at fighting those who are against the revolution. So not all French people joined the revolution, and the European powers were scared about the revolution because they were kings. And they said, what if this spreads to my country? I don't want this. Send armies to France to destroy this revolution. And of course, the French armies had to then mobilize and fight them. And Napoleon Bonaparte was just very good general, defending the revolution. And so he rose the ranks. Eventually, he kind of took over. But anyway, that's the French Revolution. Bloodshed, beheadings, massacres. It was a radical change. This scared the hell out of English people, right? They think, oh, we don't want this in our country. Yeah, I mean, like we have liberalism and we're having these, but for us, maybe reforms or some changes, but not that. Not like, let's wipe the slate clean, everyone equal, massacre the aristocrats and all this kind of stuff. That's too crazy. And in steps, and this is the key person here, in steps Edmund Burke, the father of conservatism, right? So conservatism, the conservative madhab of the West. Now, you guys often thought that if you're not liberal, you have to be a conservative, right? And maybe even you might have referred to yourselves as conservative Muslims. Don't do that, right? Because the reason the West doesn't, even in the Muslim world, the West doesn't mind you calling yourself a conservative Muslim, and there's a reason why they don't mind. In fact, they want you to. Right, so Edmund Burke basically wrote about the French Revolution, and he was horrified by it. He didn't want that to happen because there was massacres, bloodshed, fighting. It was like a civil war. Well, it was a civil war. So he says this. He says, look, you want to make changes to society. Okay, that's good. But you can't change everything, because you have to ask yourself the question. You think liberalism is great and all these and freedom and no dictatorships. Okay, that's great. But where did it come from? Right? How comes we came up with that idea and not Native Americans or the Russians or Ethiopians or Indians? Why did we come up with this idea? Why didn't they come up with this idea? Right? And he says, you know why? Because of our history and our traditions. Liberalism comes from our culture, our background. It doesn't come from just we discovered it one day looking in a microscope or a telescope, right? So he says, if it comes from our culture, don't destroy our culture, right? Because you want to wipe the slate clean and make a revolution, change everything, right? Because you're going to destabilize the society, right? You have to conserve some things. Don't change everything. Conserve some things in order to make sure that you have a stable society, because stability is actually more important, right? You don't have rights if society is in a civil war, right? You don't have rights if society is killing each other and fighting each other, always unstable and collapses and everyone breaks into factions and fighting each other, because this new world you're creating is it has no roots in the past. Right? And many, for example, as you might have seen more locally, let's say African countries, but also Southeast Asian countries and so on, many newly created countries were artificial, right? They didn't exist before. You had kingdoms, tribes, empires, but the idea that we're going to cut this into pieces, and so the Congolese are split between 2-3 countries, and these countries are new and they have no background, no tradition, no culture, nothing sacred. So then what's going to happen? They're just, I just drew them. So of course, people are going to start fighting. They're going to start getting what they want, because there's nothing they respect, because it's brand new and there's nothing sacred in it. It's just, okay, this is some lines now. Now we give you independence. Fight, like fight to get what you can, you leave. Fight for the scraps. Yeah. So that's what Edmund Burke is, right? And that's why they say, basically all you need traditions and cultures in society that create stability, individual dictatorship. Well, king, right? England, where you could say they talked about democracy, they spread it to the king. Well, the reason why why do we have 2 houses in our parliament, right? The House of Commons, that's elected, and the House of Lords, not elected, right? They inherit it from the titles, they inherit it from their fathers, right? Unelected House of Lords. Why do we have this? That's not democracy. What's going on? Why? Edmund Burke. Pure democracy where everyone votes on everything, well, then the majority will take the rights away of the minority. And of course, the minority tends to be rich. They're the rich, and the majority are poor. So the majority are going to vote to take away the rights of the minority. Oh, yeah, we can't have that, right? So they said, well, you can't have a pure government, a pure autocracy, a pure like one leader, a pure system with only one leader. He becomes a tyrant. A system of only a bunch of people deciding who, like an oligarchy, well, they only benefit each other, right? They only help each other. What you need is a mix of everything, right? So in England, autocracy, king. Oligarchy, House of Lords. Democracy, fast. Look amongst liberals, which is they say that conservatives are defending what liberals were arguing 40 years ago, right? Yeah, because you see the Conservative Party in the UK calling marriage, LGBT, and all this kind of thing. Conservatives will, the only new laws they want to bring in are things to conserve stuff like immigration. We don't want immigration. More recording this session, it appears to make sense, right, to you. So, conservatives are based